And we're live! We did it! Welcome and good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. We have got our live studio audience on Zoom, and to all of you watching on YouTube, welcome, 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 as we start the exciting world of Masechet Beitzah, which is otherwise known as Masechet Beitzah, which is otherwise known as Masechet Egg, which is otherwise known as Masechet Yom Tov, because it deals with a lot of the laws to do with Yom Tov, to do with cooking on Yom Tov, to do with cooking for Yom Tov, all these kinds of things we're going to be tackling. Erev Tavshilin is going to come up tonight, all being well, if we manage to get through the first and the second chapter, as we are so, please God, planning to do. Do we have, ladies and gentlemen, the Mishnah on your screen?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, in that case, same rules apply. If you have any questions as we go along, please do feel free to ask. But without further ado, let's get the Mishnah up on our screen. Let's get it up on my screen as well, because that's going to be quite helpful. And let's talk about Masechet Beitzah. So we're going to be talking about things which are muktzah on Yom Tov, things which are not going to be permitted to handle, to eat, to move. And the premise is that if it hasn't been prepared beforehand for usage, and it kind of arrives, as it were, comes into possible usage on Yom Tov, then there could be a problem. So we're going to be talking about nolad. Nolad is something that appears on Yom Tov. And the example that we're going to bring, first of all, is an egg. An egg that gets laid. Does an egg get laid or an egg get lain? I think it gets laid. It gets laid. Yeah. So an egg that gets laid on Yom Tov. What's the deal? It hasn't been prepared before Yom Tov, but we see it's subject to a machlokes. And interestingly, whereas normally we would expect to go to see Beis Hillel being lenient and Beis Shammai being strict, we actually see the opposite. So as we turn to Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph, the Mishnah says as follows: Beitzah shenolda b'Yom Tov, an egg which is laid on Yom Tov. Beis Shammai omrim, Beis Shammai say, te'achel, you're allowed to eat that egg. Why are you allowed to eat that egg according to Beis Shammai? Because the mother was allowed before Yom Tov. You would have been allowed to eat the chicken, and so too the egg which was inside the chicken at the start of Yom Tov. Even though the mother laid the egg on Yom Tov, it was there. It existed inside the mother before Yom Tov started, and so according to Beis Shammai, you will be allowed to eat the egg. Beis Hillel omrim, Beis Hillel say lo te'achel. Beis Hillel say that you're not allowed to eat the egg. And I believe the reason for this is that since there is a situation where you wouldn't be able to eat the egg, for example, if Shabbos came before Yom Tov, so the egg is starting its existence inside the chicken on Shabbos, which is also a problem because it means that it really is getting created on Shabbos, and you wouldn't be able to have it then on Shabbos either. So according to Beis Hillel, then we extend that and say that even if it wasn't gestating before, or even if it wasn't gestating on a Shabbos, even if it was gestating during the week and then being laid on a weekday Yom Tov, Beis Hillel would extend it and say that you can't eat the egg on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah. Beis Shammai omrim saor bakazayis v'chametz b'kakoseves. So Beis Shammai say that when it comes to chametz, saor, which is the quantity of leaven, as it says there on the screen, the amount that you would have to be seeing in your property would be a kazayis, an olive bulk's worth. The chametz, when it comes to eating it, bekakoseves, you would have to have eaten a date's worth. Let me just check if I've got that the right way around, or if it's the other way around. One of them is seeing it and one of them is eating it. And let's just check that I got that right. No, the amount to create a problem in the food is going to be the first one. It's going to be the sa'or, is going to be the kazayas, and chametz of seeing it is going to be a kosemes. Have I got that right? Okay, let's have a look. Shir isur shel chametz. Yeah. So, I'm looking in the wrong place. So the amount of yeast that is going to, the amount of leavening that is going to affect a dough, according to Beis Shammai, is going to be kazayas, and the amount of chametz, which would be prohibited to have, is a koseves, is a date's worth, which is bigger than a kazayas. And Beis Hillel say both of these sizes. Chametz is a kazayas and sa'or is a kazayas. So we're not allowed to have any leavening in our houses, and we are not allowed to eat anything either. And we're not allowed to find anything in our properties. So the size, according to Beis Hillel, is going to be equal. In both instances, it's going to be the shi'ur, it's going to be the size of an olive bulk. So, again, Beis Shammai over there having a more lenient position than Beis Hillel. They have a stricter opinion that the sizes are smaller, and therefore that is a more strict approach according to Beis Hillel. So I hope that one was clear. So Mishnah Beis, talking about the mitzvah when you slaughter an animal or you slaughter a bird. There's a mitzvah of kisui hadam. You're supposed to cover the blood that falls to the ground. You're supposed to cover that with earth. Now the problem is, what if you don't have dirt prepared before Yom Tov? So you're going to be shechting the food on Yom Tov, and then you need to be able to do kisui hadam. You need to be able to cover it with dirt, but you don't have any. And so you can't dig the dirt because that's going to be plowing. You're not allowed to do that. So are you allowed to kill the animal? So says the Mishnah in Mishnah Beis, Hashochet chayav ha'of b'Yom Tov, a person who slaughters an animal or a bird on Yom Tov. Beis Shammai omrim, yachpor badeker v'chaser. According to Beis Shammai, he may dig with a pronged tool rather than a proper digging. This is just kind of a bit of a superficial way of digging, and then you'd be able to use that to cover the blood. Beis Hillel omrim lo yishchot. Beis Hillel would say you can't shecht it if you don't have the dirt prepared. Ela im kain haya lo afar muchan miba'od yom, unless you had prepared the dirt beforehand. Umodim, however, they would agree, shim shachat, if you did go ahead and slaughter the animal or slaughter the bird, then b'di'eved, post facto, sheyachpor badeker v'chaser, you would be allowed to still scrape away and dig away a little bit and then cover it up. She'efer kira muchan hu, because the reason for that is that the ashes, as it says here, the ashes of an oven, the ashes of a stove, would be considered as muchan. So you'd be allowed to pull up this dirt, and you'd also be allowed to use ashes from an oven, even if the oven had been used. No, sorry. Even if my mistake. So ashes that had been cooked in an oven before Yom Tov, even that would be mutter. Even that would be permitted for use to cover up your blood, not your blood, but the animal or the bird's blood on Yom Tov. So according to Beis Shammai, you'd be allowed to pull up some of this dirt. According to Beis Hillel, you wouldn't even be allowed to slaughter it because you don't have the dirt prepared. However, if you did go ahead and slaughter it, then even Beis Hillel would agree that you can use the dirt that you kind of superficially scrape up And also not only that, but ashes that are in an oven that were cooked before Yom Tov, they would be able to be used for the mitzvah of Kisui Hadam. Okay, Mishnah Gimel. Dealing with a person who has got a lot of birds, in the literal sense, and they are set aside, they're prepared to be slaughterable on Yom Tov, and you've got a lot of space to cover. You need to be able to try and find all of these birds, and they're in a lot of different cages and dovecots and all that kind of thing. And there's a question of whether you're allowed to use a very large ladder in order to catch them, in order to take them, or is there a chance that utilizing this big ladder is going to look to people like you're trying to fix your roof on Yom Tov? So where do we stand on that issue? I'm sure it's all burning on everyone's minds. Says the Mishnah, Beis Shammai Omer, Beis Shammai say, Ein molichin es hasulam mishavach leshavach, that you are not allowed to move the ladder, to carry the ladder from one dovecot to another. Aval matehu mechalon lechalon, but you would be allowed to kind of incline it from one part to the other, from one window is a chalon, that translates there as a pigeonhole. So within a small amount of space, you would be allowed to move this ladder around. So that's the position of Beis Shammai, which is stricter than Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel matirin, Beis Hillel would allow for being able to move this ladder around more freely, even from dovecote. Is it pronounced dovecote or dovecot? I don't know. But either way, dovecote to another, according to Beis Hillel, you would be allowed to do that. Continuing with the Mishnah, Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai say, Lo yitol ela imkain nina miba'od yom. You wouldn't be allowed to take this bird or this dove for usage on Yom Tov unless you had, it says here to shake it, but I think it means physically gesturing that you intend to make usage of a particular bird, right? So it doesn't literally mean that you have to give it, a bit of a shake or shake it like a lulav. I think what it means is there has to be some kind of physical gesture done, holding the bird or whatever it is before Yom Tov to indicate that that's the one that you're going to take. Beis Hillel Omer, and Beis Hillel say, Omed va'omer zeh v'zeh ani noto. But Beis Hillel says this can be done verbally. It doesn't need to be done physically by taking the bird and identifying which one you're going to use on Yom Tov beforehand. Beis Hillel say you can indicate with your speech rather than your actions which one you're going to make usage of on Yom Tov, and in that way it won't be. It will be an item that best word I can think of. An item that has been prepared for usage on Yom Tov for you to be able to go ahead and slaughter. Moving on to Mishnah Daled. Mishnah Daled is going to explain to us that the designation is only going to work if the birds in question are there before Yom Tov and when you want them as well. So what happens if before Yom Tov you go and designate some black doves that you're going to utilize on Yom Tov, and when you come the next day, the black ones are gone, and you find that there are white ones there. Or vice versa, levanim, you designate white birds, and you come back and you find that there are black ones there. Shnaim umatzah shlosha, you designated 2 birds, and then when you come back there are 3. So it could well be that your 2 original ones are there, but there's also now a 3rd one, and so you can't be certain which of the 2 that you designated. Says the Mishnah, Asurim, they're all going to be forbidden to you because these are not the birds. These are not the birds you wanted. Okay, so because they haven't been, some of you got it. These are not the birds you're looking for. Maybe that helps you a bit more. So because they are not the ones you designated, you're not supposed to use them on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah, Shlosha matzah shnayim mutarim. But if you designated 3, and now you come back and there are two, the Mishnah says mutarim, you'll be allowed to use them, even though you could argue, I can hear you all saying it, but how do you know it's the same ones? Maybe those three flew away and two new ones came in their place. Nonetheless, the Mishnah says that you will be allowed. If it's gone from 3 down to 2, the Mishnah says mutar, they will be permitted for usage. Besoch haken umatzah lifnei haken asurim. If, when you designated them, they were inside the nest, and when you find them, they are in front of the nest, then the Mishnah says asurim. Then the Mishnah says they are going to be forbidden. And that's because maybe they flew off and new ones came from around the area and have landed in front of this nest. And that's why they're not going into it, because it's not their nest. Ve'im ein sham elahein, but if you know with certainty that there are not going to be any other birds found in your local neighborhood, harei elu mutarim, then the ones that you find are going to be permitted. And incidentally, the Gemara says that the radius is 50 cubits. If there are no other birds to be found within 50 cubits, 50 amot perimeter, circumference, area of your nest, then you are going to be able to use those on Yom Tov. Continuing with Mishnah Hey. So we're going to see things now which Beis Shammai say you're not allowed to do, and Beis Hillel say you are allowed to. And the reason why Beis Hillel will permit them is because they will enhance your simchas Yom Tov. They will enhance your enjoyment of Yom Tov. One less thing to worry about. Says the Mishnah, Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai say, Ein mesalkin es hatrisin b'Yom Tov. Beis Shammai say you may not remove shutters on Yom Tov. So I think all of these things are going to be somewhat associated with food. So why would you want to remove these shutters? You would want to remove the shutters because what are we using these shutters for? They're like cupboard doors. You'd have to detach them to be able to. Pardon me?
Let it not.
No, it's not. They're like cupboard doors or closet doors, or things like that. And in order to be able to access what's behind them, you'd have to detach them. And if you detach them, then it looks like you're demolishing on Yom Tov, which you're not allowed to do. But according to Beis Hillel say matirim, af lahachzir. Beis Hillel would permit it as long as you're trying to access food. So let's say it's some kind of cupboard door that is storing food, and you want to access the food. So you would be allowed, according to Beis Hillel, to detach the door, even though that looks like demolishing. And Beis Hillel would say you're even allowed to put it back. And the reason why you're allowed to put it back is because if the person wouldn't take it off, if they weren't allowed to put it back, then you're spoiling their enjoyment of Yom Tov. So we want to try and increase Simchas Yom Tov. And so we want to allow for this door to be detached so that you can access the food, give yourself your Simchas Yom Tov, and then put it back. So that's the position of Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai Omrim, Ein notlin es ha'eli likatsev alav basar. Beis Shammai say that you are not allowed to take the roller. Does it say roller on the screen? Oh, it says a pestle. Likatsev alav basar. Even if you're going to be using it to chop up meat, according to Beis Shammai, you're not allowed to do it. It's basically a large wooden roller, or pestle as it translates it there, which was used to chop or to grind meat. And so even though there's a chance that you might use it for some other problematic usage, Beis Hillel matirim. Beis Hillel will permit using this equipment, even though Beis Shammai do not allow to. Now, we'll be familiar that you're allowed to do stuff that pertains to preparing food. So, it's the leniencies that we're relying on over here. The position of Beis Hillel to be able to do these things in our minds already, we might think to ourselves, yeah, there's so many things that are allowed when it comes to food preparation on Yom Tov. But here you go. Beis Shammai's position is that you would not be allowed to use that, and you would not be allowed to prepare food using that. Beis Shammai omrim, ein nosnin esaor lifnei hadarsan velo yagbihenu. So Beis Shammai, when it comes to keeping skin of an animal fresh and elastic to be able to process it later. So what they would do is they would spread it out in a place where people can step over it, and would stretch it, and that helps keep the elasticity and keeps it usable and workable, so that when Yom Tov is finished and then they come to process the hide, it's in good enough condition to be able to do that. But according to Beis Shammai, you would not be allowed to put this hide in this kind of place in order for people to be able to tread upon it, or to be able to lift it up to keep it stretched and a bit flexible. Ela im kain yeshimor kazayis basar, unless Beis Shammai says there is an olive bulk's worth of meat attached to it, in which case what you're moving is really the meat, which you're allowed to move, and the hide, which is otherwise muksa, you are allowed to still move along with this kazayit of meat, this olive bulk's worth of meat that's attached to the hide. But according to Beis Hillel, material, it's not going to be considered muksa. Why is it not going to be considered muksa? Because there's a chance that someone's going to say, well, I'm just not going to kill this animal because I don't want to have to lose out on the hide. And if they make that decision, then they're not going to enjoy their Yom Tov because they don't have this lovely fresh animal, this lovely fresh meat. So Beis Hillel, again, are going to permit being able to utilize this hide on Yom Tov. Beis Shammai omrim, Beis Shammai say, Ein motziin lo es hakatan v'lo es halulav v'lo es sefer Torah l'rshus harabim v'Beis Hillel material. When it comes to being able to carry things, so Beis Shammai only hold that it's permitted to carry things which are going to be used for food, and Beis Hillel will say that it's permitted to carry anything if it's there to enhance your Yom Tov, your enjoyment. So Beis Shammai will say you're not allowed to carry a child, and you're not allowed to carry your lulav, and you're not allowed to carry a Sefer Torah from a private domain to a public domain. But Beis Hillel do permit this because otherwise you're going to be spoiling your enjoyment of Yom Tov. Mishnah Vav. So Mishnah Vav is going to be talking to us about different separations that would take place, and you've got separations that take place before any kind of preparation of food, such as separating food for truma to give to the kohanim, or ma'aseh, or the tithes that you take from produce. And then you've got other things like hafrashas challah, the amount of dough that you will separate, which can only take place if you've already started preparing the dough. You can't take challah before you've prepared the dough. So there are some things that you would separate before a food preparation process, and something like hafrashas challah, which you can only take when you are in the middle of preparing that food. So Beis Shammai omrim, Beis Shammai say, Ein molichin challah umatanos lekohen b'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to carry. You're not allowed to carry. Which Mishnah? I can't find it on the page. Yeah, you're not allowed to carry challah. You're not allowed to take challah umatanos or other gifts like teruma, like maaser. La kohen b'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to take these things to a kohen on Yom Tov. Bein shehumu me'emesh, whether they were separated yesterday when it wasn't yet Yom Tov. Bein shehumu me'hayom, or whether you separated them today on Yom Tov. Beis Hillel matir, but Beis Hillel do permit these separations to take place. Amru lahem Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai said to Beis Hillel, Gazei Rashava. There is a parallel here with another topic, and the halacha that applies to that topic must therefore apply logically to this topic as well. Challah umatanos matano hakohen. When it comes to challah and when it comes to these other gifts, they are a gift to a kohen. Utruma, oh come on, Nick. Okay, I'm an idiot. Let's try this one again. Let's backtrack just a little bit. I'm sorry, everyone. You've all got your finger on the pulse, and you're all calling me out on this. I can see it. I can see it on the screen. You're all like, you're waffling, Nick. Okay, go again. Beis Shammai Omrim. Beis Shammai say, Ein molichin chala umatonos lakohen b'yom tov. You're not allowed to take chala, which we have discussed, which is taken during the preparation process. Umatonos. Matanos are not the other types of tithes. My apologies. Matanos are the parts of animals that would be gifted to Kohanim. And that is the arm, the jaw, and the stomach. So you're allowed to shecht, you're allowed to prepare food, but there would be portions that you would gift to Kohen. According to Beis Shammai, though, you won't be able to do that on Yom Tov. Whether you had separated them before Yom Tov, whether you were separating them on the day. But according to Beis Hillel, you're going to be allowed to do that. Because again, you're allowed to prepare food on Yom Tov, and so you're allowed to gift the challah, and you're allowed to shecht an animal. And so you're going to be allowed to designate those parts as well. Amru lahem Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai say to Beis Hillel, Gezeira Shava. There's going to be a parallel topic, and the halachas we're going to see are going to apply in that way. Logically, challah umatanos matana kohen. When it comes to challah and the meat gifts, these are gifts that get given to a kohen. Utruma, and truma is also matana la kohen, right? Truma, which is taken before a food preparation starts. You're not allowed to start working with it until you've gifted truma. That is also a gift for a kohen. Kashem she'en molichin es truma, kachem molichin es matanos. In the same way that you're not allowed to take teruma to a kohen on Yom Tov, so you're also not allowed to take these gifts, these other designations to a kohen on Yom Tov. And that's the logic that they extend from one to the other. You've got anything which can be gifted to a kohen, since some of those things you definitely can't take on Yom Tov, because you're not allowed to take these portions on Yom Tov because they're not associated with food preparation. So anything that is associated with food preparation, you're also not going to be able to take to the Kohanim. Amru lahem Beis Hillel. But Beis Hillel clearly had a different logic. They say, no, this is not the case. Imamartem b'truma she'enu zakai ba'aramasa, tamru b'matanos shezakai ba'aramasa, says Beis Hillel, if you say in the case of the teruma, which he did not have the right to separate, meaning that, as we've said, teruma is taken before the food preparation starts. So that could have been done yesterday, right? Because that's before the food preparation. You want to make fresh food on Yom Tov, you're allowed to do so. Teruma has nothing to do with that. Teruma you're taking before the food preparation starts. That could have been done before Yom Tov. That's why you're not allowed to take teruma on Yom Tov. You're going to try and extend that logic and say the same with respects to these gifts, the challah, the matanos, the meat gifts that you are allowed to process and deal with on Yom Tov. You're now going to try and extend the restrictions to those things as well. Says Beit Hillel, I strongly and fervently disagree, and that's why they have the machlokes that they have. Beis Shammai, you're not allowed to. Beis Hillel, you are allowed to. Mishnah Zion. How far can a person do malacha to prepare food in a normative way? That sounds like terrible English, but let's take a look at what the Mishnah is saying. Beis Shammai Omrim. Beis Shammai say, Tavlin niduchin b'ma'och shel eitz. Beis Shammai say that spices may be crushed with a wooden pestle. So according to Beitzah Shammai, you can pound these things up on Yom Tov, because otherwise you're going to lose the taste somewhat if you do them before Yom Tov. So he acknowledges at least that you can prepare them on Yom Tov, but it has to be done differently. It has to be done with a different type of utensil or kitchen equipment than you would otherwise use. So they say you can use a ma'och shel eitz, this grinder, this pestle made out of wood, v'hamelach bapach, and you can prepare salt in a small jug, rather than the normal, perhaps big quantities that you would work with. Uve'etz haparur, and you are allowed to use a wooden spoon, a wooden ladle as well, to be able to kind of use the back of the spoon to smush things down. And the difference between the difference between these things is as follows: the spices which are going to lose their taste, that you can do more normatively. When it comes to things that won't lose the taste, like salt, so you have to go even further with your shinui. You have to do that even more differently and prepare it in small quantities, or use the back of a spoon. Beis Hillel Omrim, however, they say tavlin neduchim kedarkan b'madoch shel even, that spices can be ground up in the normal way with a stone pestle, v'hamelach b'madoch shel eitz, and salt, which doesn't lose taste. So I guess Beis Hillel there are saying that you need to do it with a bit of a shinui, but for that you can use your wooden pestle. You don't need to go as far as to using the back of a wooden spoon instead. Continues the Mishnah in Mishnah Ches. Beis Hillel are going to forbid using large instruments. And that's because the purpose of usually using these large instruments, perhaps like industrial-sized instruments, is because you would usually be using them to then put the items into storage. And you're not allowed on Yom Tov to put these things into storage. So says the Mishnah, Habora kitnis b'Yom Tov. One who is separating kitnis, sorting beans on Yom Tov. Okay, fine. I got a little bit ahead of myself there, but we're okay. Habora kitnis b'Yom Tov. When it comes to separating out kitnis, beans, legumes on Yom Tov, Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai say borer ochel v'ochel. Beis Shammai say you can take what you need to eat, and then you can eat it. Now on Shabbos, you're not allowed to sort out the bad from the good, if you recall. You're allowed to take the edible and eat that, but we're not supposed to take the bad from the good. But on Yom Tov, that's not the case. Beis Hillel Omrim, Beis Hillel say, Bore kedarka, you're allowed to sort in a normal way, even if that means that the pasolet, even if that means the bad is being sifted through. So you're allowed to sort it out b'cheika, you're allowed to sort it out in your lap, ubakanon, or in a basket, ubatamchui, and you're allowed to sort it out in a plate, but not with heavy instruments. Aval lo b'tavla, but you're not supposed to use a board, v'lo b'nafa, or with a sifter, v'lo b'kavra, or with a sieve. And the reason for that, as I was saying earlier, is that when you would use these large instruments, it's usually to be able to put some of it into storage, rather than for immediate use, and that's going to be a problem. Rabban Gamliel Omer, Rabban Gamliel says, Af mediach v'sholer, even more lenient. You can even rinse things in water and then skim off the chaff. So if you pour water on your kernels or whatever it is, KERNELS, then the chaff will float to the top and you'll be able to skim that off the surface. Even that would be permitted, according to Rabban Gamliel. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Tes. Where is Mishnah Tes? Over here. Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai say, Ein mishalchin b'Yom Tov ela manos. Beis Shammai say that you can only give something to another person on Yom Tov if it's as a gift, and if it's portions of food that are ready to be eaten. Otherwise, you should not be sending things to your friends and to your neighbors. Beis Hillel Omrim, Beis Hillel saying, Mishalchin behema chaya va'of, that you would be allowed to send live cattle, live animals, and live birds, bein chai bein shchutim, whether they're alive or whether they are shechted. You're allowed to send those things, even though they would need preparation. You would be allowed to send those things according to Beis Hillel. Mishalchin yenos shemanin usulasos v'kitnias. You're also allowed to send wine and oil and flour and kitnias, beans, legumes. Aval lo, just don't send it to your Ashkenazi neighbors on Pesach. Aval lo tavua, but you cannot send grain, unprocessed grain. and the grain is going to require grinding, which is just too close to the early processes. And so there's going to be a problem there for Beis Hillel to be able to send these things on Yom Tov. For Rabbi Shimon, Matir B'Tavua. Rabbi Shimon would say that grain is mutter because you don't need to worry about how much you're doing. If you were to use a small instrument and give that to your friend to be able to grind, they would be able to do that. They would be able to process it. No problems there, according to Rabbi Shimon. Says the Mishnah, final Mishnah in Perek Aleph. Wow, it's 35 minutes in. Okay, guys, final Mishnah in Perek Aleph. Here we go. Meshalchin Kalim. You're allowed to send vessels, clothing, whatever it might be, a kli. You're allowed to send it as a gift to somebody. Bein tefurin, bein she'enan tefurin. Whether it is sewn up, all right. So we're talking about clothes. Whether they are sewn up or whether they are not sewn up. V'afal pi sheyesh bahem kilayim. Even though they might be full of kilayim, since they could be used as a seat rather than as an item of clothing, you'd be allowed to send those. As long as they are required and associated with the festival, with the chag. Aval lo sandal hamasuma, but you're not allowed to send a cleated shoe, like a football boot, which has got the studs underneath. You won't be allowed to send shoes with studs. And the reason for that is there's a decree that you can't wear these on Shabbos because back in the day, at the time of the Romans, there were these stories about how they'd go and hide in caves to protect themselves from the Romans. And apparently one time, somebody was walking around with these studded shoes. They thought the Romans were coming to attack them, and everybody panicked, and there was a loss of life as a result of that. So they said that people should not wear these shoes anymore. I believe on Shabbos at the very least. V'lo minal she'ein tafer. And you're not allowed to send sandals that are not yet stitched together. They're unfinished. They won't be of any use on Yom Tov. Rabbi Yehuda says, Af lo minal lavan mipnei shetzarech uman. You wouldn't be allowed to send white shoes that require a craftsman to polish them black. So I guess that wouldn't necessarily include a pair of trainers which are meant to be white, but a pair of white shoes that are, I guess it's not necessarily specifically kind of white, but just unfinished, not yet polished, not yet painted shoes that require an expert to still finish the process. Rabbi Yehuda would said you would also not be allowed to send those. Zer Klal, says the Mishnah to finish off Perek Rishon. This is the general rule. Kol she'ne'osin ba b'Yom Tov, anything that can be a benefit to somebody and can be used on Yom Tov, meshalchin oso. You are allowed to send those items to your friend on Yom Tov. Mazel tov, everyone, on finishing chapter 1. Hands up, who's still okay for chapter 2? Yeah, okay, we've got some hands in the air. We've had someone drop off there. Don't know if they thought we were finishing. Oh no, I think it's because I'm supposed to be in an executive meeting. Never mind. Continuing, ladies and gentlemen, with chapter 2. He'll catch it on the rerun on Bushy YouTube +1. So, moving on to cooking. A person is not allowed to cook on Yom Tov if you're cooking that food to be eaten on Shabbos the following day. And the process, the concept of Erev Tavshilin is therefore the compensation for that. That we have an Erev Tavshilin that therefore allows us to be able to prepare food in an acceptable way. Says the Mishnah, Yom Tov shechal liyez Erev Shabbos. If Yom Tov is falling on a Friday, lo yivashal adam batchila mi Yom Tov l'Shabbos. A person is not allowed to start cooking on Yom Tov if you're going to be having that food on Shabbos. Aval mevashel hu li Yom Tov. But you are allowed to cook for yourself for Yom Tov. V'im hosir l'Shabbos. And if you have leftovers, then those leftovers can be used on Shabbos. V'osa tavshil me'erev Yom Tov. But you're allowed to prepare a dish before Yom Tov, v'somech alav l'Shabbos, and be and rely upon that to prepare food for Shabbos. How much do we need to prepare for this Erev Tavshilin? Beis Shammai omrim shnei tavshilin. Beis Shammai say you have to prepare 2 dishes, 2 cooked dishes. Beis Hillel omrim tavshil echad. Beis Hillel, which is how we hold, says you have to prepare one dish. The Shavin, they would, however, both agree. Badag ubeitza she'alav shehein shnei tafshilin. That if a person had prepared a fish with an egg on it, that would be considered two dishes, even though it might look like one. It would be considered two dishes. Achalo or she'avad. If you ate this food beforehand, if it got eaten, or it gets lost, lo yivashel alav batchila, then you cannot start cooking on Yom Tov if you no longer have these items. Vim shi'er mimenu koshu, but if you have even the slightest bit left over, then the Mishnah says somech alav l'shabbos, then you would be allowed to rely on that. How much has to be left over? I believe the minimum size is a kazayas, an olive's bulk. This isn't explicitly said in the Mishnah, but I guess it's drawn out in the Gemara. Mishnah base. There was a minhag to purify yourself on Erev Yom Tov, in time for Yom Tov, and also the minhag to purify and immerse your vessels that needed purification in a mikveh. There was the minhag to do this before Yom Tov started. You wouldn't be allowed to immerse your dishes on Shabbos or Yom Tov, because that is now a tikkun, that is now fixing it up ready for usage on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So if Erev Shabbos if Erev Yom Tov falls on Shabbos, so Shabbos going into Sunday, then you're going to have to immerse your vessel, this Mishnah. If Yom Tov is falling the day after Shabbos, Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai say, Matbilin es hakol milifnei haShabbat. Then you, yourself, your vessels, everything has to be done before Shabbos. Beis Hillel Omrim, Beis Hillel say, Kelim milifnei haShabbos va'atam l'Shabbos. Your vessel. There we go. So your vessels will have to be immersed before Shabbos, but a person would be allowed, according to Beis Hillel, to immerse on Shabbos in a mikvah. I'm sorry, I hadn't scrolled down over there. So that is Mishnah base. Mishnah Gimel. Officially, there is no obligation to immerse stone vessels, and so for that reason, we see the following halacha apply in Mishnah Gimel. V'shavin, they would agree. Shemyashikin esamayim b'kli even l'taharan, aval lo matbilin. So there's no obligation to immerse stone vessels, but if you wanted to purify them in the water, then what you can do is you can touch the vessel very lightly in the water. And the way I think they would do this, if you imagine a stone bowl and they would fill it with water, and then they would kind of dunk the water, the bowl into the water until the waters meet. So even if it's not fully immersed, even if it's only kind of touching the surface in that way, you'd be allowed to do that on Shabbos. Aval lo matbilin, but you wouldn't be allowed to fully immerse it, according to the Mishnah. Matbilin migav legav umechavura lechavura. Says the Mishnah, you'd be allowed to immerse it in order to change it from one level, one status to another, and from one company to another with regards to the Korban Pesach. What does all this mean? What this means is that if you have a rabbinically impure vessel, you would be allowed to immerse it, and that could upgrade the purity level for usage of items in the next grade up. What does all that mean? That means that there are different levels of tumah, and depending on what level of impurity the vessel may have, it could be permitted for use for different types of things. So at a lowest level, it could be permitted for use with the highest level, whichever way we're going here. Sometimes it could be permitted for unsacrificial things. Sometimes it could be permitted for use with teruma. Sometimes it could be permitted for use with sacrifices. It depends if you're stripping off the layers of impurity that are surrounding this item. So in order to change it from one level to another, you would be allowed to do that. And with regards to being able to change it for usage between different groups of the Korban Pesach, the Mishnah is telling us over here that you would be allowed to do that as well. So if you had immersed it on the condition that you were going to use it to eat a Korban Pesach with a particular group, and now you want to change your mind and you want to go with a different group, so then you would have to immerse this vessel again to be able to do it, and that would be allowed according to our Mishnah. Continuing with Mishnah Daled. Mishnah Daled, what are we talking about with Mishnah Daled? Okay, so there are different korbanos which you can eat, and because you can eat them, you can kill them on Yom Tov. So it revolves, this Mishnah is going to revolve around a korban olah, a fully burnt up offering, which is called a korban re'iyah, the olas re'iyah, which was brought every chag on the Shalosh Regalim, and it was brought as a sacrifice for all the people visiting Yerushalayim, for the fact that you are visiting Yerushalayim. And then there would be private korbanot as well, such as the shlamim, the shalmei chagiga, the shlamim offering which was brought for a chag, and the shalmei simcha, which was brought by people, a shlamim offering which was brought for your own personal private korban. Now these two shlamim offerings, you would have to do smicha, you would rest your hands on these animals before you shecht them, which is going to be discussed because of the animal's muksa, in which case can you actually put your hands on them or not. So we're revolving around these different korbanos over here as we approach Mishnah Daled. Beis Shammai Omrim, Beis Shammai say, Mevi'in shlamim, you're allowed to bring these shlamim offerings, these peace offerings, but according to Beis Shammai, ve'ein somchin alein, you don't do smicha, you don't lay your hands on these animals. So you're allowed to bring them, but smicha is not a process that is done because these animals are muktzah, and so when you put your weight on them, you are making use of muktzah items. Aval lo olos, according to Beis Shammai, you would not bring the korban olas re'iyah, the olah offering for coming to Yerushalayim, that wouldn't be brought on Yom Tov, according to Beis Shammai. Ubeis Hillel Omrim, Beis Hillel say, Mevin shlamim va'olos v'somchin aleim. You're allowed to bring shlamim, you're allowed to bring an olah, and you're allowed to do smicha as well. And the reason for that is you're allowed to bring anything that is required for that day. And you're allowed to do smicha because it's a necessary stage before you slaughter it. So because it has to be done right before you do the shechita and not, prior to the to Yom Tov, let's say. So Beis Hillel say you can do it on Yom Tov. Beis Shammai, I believe, would say you just have to do it before Yom Tov because you can't do it on Yom Tov itself. Mishnah Hay, they also argue about boiling water when it comes to Yom Tov. Beis Shammai Omrim in Mishnah Hay, Lo yecham adam chamin l'raglav. You are not allowed to heat up water on Yom Tov if you're using it to wash your feet. Ela in kain ru'un lishtia, unless it was also fit for drinking, because you're allowed to prepare water for food or drink, but not for other usages, according to Beis Shammai. Uveis Hillel matir, Beis Hillel would permit this. Why? Osa adam, not why. Sorry. The reason is because once you're already permitting it for food and drink, you're also therefore allowed to extend that for any other types of usages. Says the Mishnah, finishing off Mishnah Hey, Osa Adam Adora Mischamen Kenegda. You're allowed to make a big fire, bonfire, Umischamen Kenegda, to be able to warm yourself by it. The same extension for Beis Hillel applying over there. Mishnah Vav, we're going to see three stringencies that Rabban Gamliel had, where he was being sensitive to the position of Beis Shammai, which is unusual because he was actually descended from Beis Hillel. So even though he was a family member of Beis Hillel, he had a stricter approach to these three halachos. There were three things that Rabban Gamliel was strict about in accordance with Beis Shammai's opinion. You're not allowed to bury. Let's scroll down. You're not allowed to cover up, to insulate hot food from Yom Tov for Shabbos. Right now, Beis Hillel would say, well, you've done an Erev Tavshilin, which now permits you to do these things. Beis Shammai would say that for any type of cooking process, it requires you to have done an Erev Tavshilin, or the equivalent, before Yom Tov started. So if you wanted to insulate something, you have to have made sure to insulate something before Yom Tov, so that you could also insulate something for Shabbos. Whereas Beis Hillel says everything is encompassed under the Erev Tavshilin. Ve'ein zokvin es hamenorah b'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to assemble a candelabra on Yom Tov, which may be in kind of loosely connected parts. You're not allowed to assemble them on Yom Tov. Ve'ein ofin pitin geritzin ela rakikin. You're also not allowed to bake thick loaves, only very thin loaves. And that's because you'd be exerting too much effort to be able to bake these things, which according to Beis Shammai you wouldn't be allowed to do, and according to Rabban Gamliel he was strict as well. Amar Rabban Gamliel said, Mimehen shel Beis Abba, in my father's house for as long as I've ever known, Lo hayu ofin pitin geritzin ela rakikin. He would only ever bake thin loaves. He would never bake big, thick loaves of bread that required exertion. Amru lo, but they said back to him, the rabbis said back to him, what can we do about your father's house? They were strict on themselves and they were lenient for everyone else. They were lenient for everyone else, and they were allowed to bake big loaves, and they were allowed to bake charcoal crusted roasted loaves, bread that was grilled on coals, toast basically. So those things were allowed as a leniency by his father's house, even though their family, by their own volition, was stricter. Mishnah Zayin, Afu Amar Shlosha Dvarim Lahakya. Rabban Gamliel also paskin three things leniently. What were these three things? Says the Mishnah. Mechabdin bein hamitos. You're allowed to sweep up between the furniture on Shabbos, and we don't need to be afraid of what that might do to the surface of the floor. Umanichin es amugmar b'Yom Tov, and you're allowed to put incense on the coals on Yom Tov. Va'osin gadim mekulas b'leilei pesachim, and you're allowed to roast a kid, a goat, a sheep, on Leil Pesach, which I think is talking about even after the Zman of the Beis HaMikdash, when now we have the custom to not have any lamb on Pesach, because of the potential of it being misconstrued for the Korban Pesach. It would seem that Rabban Gamliel was lenient. The Chachamim Moshe, as we know, the Chachamim are strict, they forbid this on Yom Tov. Mishnah Ches, Shlosha, oh my goodness me, let's try and hurry this up, guys. Shlosha Devarim Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Matir. Three things was Elazar ben Azariah permissive of, V'chachamim Osrim. So following on from this kind of structure of rabbis being more lenient than the Chachamim, we're now going to see three leniencies of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Says the Mishnah, Paraso Yotza B'Ritzur Sheben Karneha. You're allowed to take an animal out, with a cow out, with a decorative strap around its horns. Mekardin esa behema b'Yom Tov. You're allowed to use a metal comb for an animal on Yom Tov, as opposed to something which perhaps is a bit blunter and stands less chance of wounding or bruising the animal. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, you'd be allowed to even use this metal comb to remove fleas from animals, even though it could cause bruising. And you are allowed to grind up peppers, which would require very large grinders. So you're allowed to use those grinders, according to Elazar ben Azariah, on Yom Tov. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ein Mikardin Esa Behema B'Yom Rabbi Yehuda says you can't use them with the metal comb because it could inflict a wound. Aval Mekatzrafin, but you could use this blunter wooden comb to be able to do that on Yom Tov. Chachamim say Ein Mikardin Aflo Mekatzrafin. Not allowed to do either of these things according to Beis Hillel on Yom Tov. Mishnah Tes. Harei Chayim Shel Pilpulin Tameya Mishum Shlosha Kelim. The way a pepper mill was constructed was in three parts, in three components. There was a base where you would put the peppers into, and that base could be Mekabel Tumah. It could contract Tumah. Then there's the top part, which chops up, which is made of metal, and that can be Metame as well. That can contract impurity. And then there was a middle part, which was the sifting apparatus, which was also susceptible to Tumah. But the point is, I believe, that they wouldn't necessarily contaminate each other. I think they could individually be contaminated. They are able to contract Tumah as three individual vessels. Mishum Kli Kibble, either because it is a Kli Kibble, it is a receptacle like the bottom component, Umishum Kli Matachos, or because it's a metal component like the top part, Umishum Kli Kavara, or it's because it is the Kli that would sift through, that would collect the chaff. So all three of these things could be Mekabel Tumah, could contract ritual impurity even in three different ways. And finally, Mishnah Yud, to finish off Perek Beis for tonight. Agala Shel Katan, a children's wagon, which is kind of like, if you can imagine, like a little trolley thing that children would use to keep their balance and to be able to help them walk. Says the Mishnah, Agala Shel Katan Tamea Midras V'Niteles B'Shabbos. They can contract Tumah by being an item that people would walk on or would lean on or would put their weight on. So it is able to contaminate and contract Tumah in that way because it supports the weight of the child using it as their walker. Minitelis b'Shabbos, and it can be used on Shabbos. Ve'ena nigreres ela al gabe kelim, but you shouldn't use it to walk with on mud, basically on a natural floor, because you may create grooves in the ground, which you're not allowed to do. So it can only be used on top of a surface. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol ha'kelim ein nigrarin chutz min ha'gala mipnei shehi chaveshes. According to Rabbi Yehuda, no vessel may be dragged along the ground except this wagon, because this wagon is going to flatten the dirt. It's not going to make grooves, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not making a track, it's not furrowing the ground, and therefore it's going to be permitted, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Mazel tov, everybody, on completing chapter 2, Perek Beis of Maseches Beitzah, and that's all for this evening, ladies and gentlemen. So we'll see you next time on Mishnah Mastery. In the meantime, have a wonderful and meaningful night. Take care, everyone.